more hopeful people are, the more likely they are to act.
When we feel like there's like no more future, no more hope, then we are actually going to consume more.
Compassion and action are at the heart of what Jane talks about.
Majority of the vegan things are plastic, unfortunately.
Over time, eventually, totally spontaneously, 3,000 farmers were starting to do composting.
We truly know the truth and what is right within ourselves. Shawn Sweeney, strategic storyteller and impact producer. Shawn Sweeney helps bring stories to life that move people to care and act. For over 15 years, he has served the Jane Goodall Institute, where he's Associate Vice President of Communications and Partnerships. His work has spanned youth empowerment, digital storytelling, creative production, and brand development, all grounded in the belief that lasting change begins with listening and honoring the lived experiences of those closest to the issues. Shawn's approach centers on relationships, reciprocity, and respect, recognizing that the most powerful solutions often come from within communities themselves. He works to create space for wisdom that too often goes unheard and helps translate local efforts into global impact. With academic training in conservation, psychology, and humane education, and deep experience across movements for environmental and social justice, he blends clarity, compassion, and creativity in everything he does. Introduced to the arts by his grandmother, Shawn holds a lifelong reverence for creative expression. He sees storytelling and art as an essential tool for imagining a better future and inspiring the action it takes to build it. At Artful Impact, he invites others to consider how beauty, narrative, and shared purpose can help heal people and the planet. Wow. I'm so honored to have you here, and also to get to ask you so many questions, and for people to get to experience you and everything that you do. As I'm so grateful for your support in my art journey and for all the beautiful projects that we've been co-creating and working on. Thank you so much for being the light in this path.
I'm so glad to be here and to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. So you spent years working with Jane Goodall, and what have you learned from her about the power of compassion and storytelling, and how has that influenced the way you show up in your work?
So over 20 years ago, I started as a member of Jane's youth program called Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots, and compassion and action are at the heart of what Jane talks about what she founded Roots and Shoots to be all about. It's a simple program that helps young people to learn that they can recognize problems in their community, feel a sense of compassion, and then come up with projects that address those problems. So compassion and action and also hope are fundamental to everything that is Jane. A lot of people don't realize that Jane actually has had two careers, and her first career was as a scientist, but even that was accidental. She always talks about how she grew up wanting to go to Africa and tell stories about animals, and becoming a scientist was a means to an end. So really for her first career was as a scientist or as a storyteller, and her second career was starting to see the stories that she had been telling for so long turn into tragedies, recognizing all the problems that we were facing in the world 35 years ago even. And so she knew that if we continued on a path like that there was no hope for the world. And so she turned that sort of perspective into action and recognized that a big part of fueling a positive future, a hopeful future, was all about helping people feel hope through storytelling. And she often talks about the way to connect head and heart is through a story. And she knows what story to tell from listening to people and learning from them. And then, drawing from her 91 years of stories to help them connect. So there's so much there in keeping stories hopeful and listening and being compassionate for people's experiences and working to connect her listening with the stories that she tells and amplifies and that sort of thing.
That's beautiful. She definitely shares the wisdom that we are all here to learn and experience. And also seeing her like moving through the world with so much passion and so much drive when she's 91 years old. And I really hope that so many of us who are change makers and sitting in this room or who are listening are going to have as much drive when we get older. And it feels like that truly is her life force, is purpose.
She absolutely says that all the time, that what keeps her going is that sense of purpose and that real need to keep people hopeful, because we know that the more hopeful people are, the more likely they are to act. We actually know that from psychological research, which is really fascinating. And so she clings to that and, keeps going. And that's a good lesson for us all. You're right.
Yeah. And I guess, when we are hopeful, then there is still action. We can still do something. You're like, okay, I got this. We can do this. But then when we are like, there's so many doom and gloom stories, right? When we watch, and it's like, it's draining almost in a way, right? It's like, okay, like what, like there's like nothing is going to happen. And there's this book, I can't remember the name right now, but it basically speaks about that when we feel like there's like no more future, no more hope, then we are actually going to consume more because we are feeling like things are ending. So we're in this like hectic rush of like this overconsumption. And so how can we slow down and also have people like Jane Goodall inspire that there is hope, and that as long as we take action and also change the way that we are and slow down and shift from consumerism to environmentalism. So in your work also supporting young change makers and communities, what have you observed about the role creativity plays in sparking meaningful change?
So I think there's two sides to that. So picking up on the storytelling angle, a lot of what we learn from Jane and a lot of what we do in our work and what I do in my own personal work is help tell stories that help people see themselves in the narrative. And so there's a big part of the work that we do with young people and communities to share stories from other people like them so that they connect with the action that was taken and the impact that was created and want that for themselves. So there's
role models.
Yeah. And there's really interesting outcomes that we've seen, like so much in the nonprofit world, it can be hard to quantify impact, and we like strike gold when we can. And there's a project I worked on not too long ago that was what we consider a behavior change communications campaign, very technical term, really just for a campaign that is focused on changing a singular behavior in a community of people. And there's really cool science that led us to specific communities in Western Tanzania. And what we identified was the most kind of environmentally destructive practice was cutting down trees. And what we learned was that people were cutting down trees because they didn't know how they didn't know how to keep the soil enriched. So what we introduced as an alternative was composting, which here we think is, old school, but there it's brand new technology to them. It's a brand new agricultural approach, and taking this specific approach with behavior change communications, we made this huge marketing campaign out of the idea of composting. And it had theater, and it had billboards, and it had all these really creative aspects to it. We even came up with a mascot and had a costume made of the mascot that was a tree, and there was a farmer who was a composting farmer. Anyways, lots of really creative elements to it, deep research and listening with the community to understand what would resonate with them the most.
Do you test first, or do you how
that was the really fun part with this project, is that we had the opportunity to first listen and understand audience and the community in deep and meaningful ways, and then, test our marketing tools and see how things went from there. And what was really interesting is there are all these techniques that we use, like I mentioned, the theater and the storytelling. There was a soccer tournament. There was also a big initiative with faith leaders to have faith leaders preach about composting on Sunday. Also, a big campaign that focused on training lead farmers in how to do composting, and then giving them the tools and resources to go and train other farmers in it. So it was really interesting. In the sort of first circle of work that we did on this, only 700 farmers were trained, but over time, eventually, totally spontaneously, 3,000 farmers were starting to do composting, and we didn't have a direct connection to all 3,000 farmers. Wow. So it was just really interesting for me in that, we used all these techniques that use that typical marketing, storytelling, theater, as a form of storytelling in a creative way, but also amplifying those lead farmers and their stories and the success that they were experiencing, doing, just simply applying compost to their farms, created more food for their families, allowed them to sell more food at the market and make more money for their families. And it's too soon to see if it's having an effect on the forest. But we do know from post research that many of the farmers said that they no longer needed to cut the forest because they had this new approach to keeping their own soil healthy. So it's just a big win-win-win. And the other interesting component about this is chimpanzees are our focal species for conservation, because that's the species that Jane studied. And that's the reason we were in Western Tanzania with this work. And we never mentioned chimpanzees to these communities once. We know that they're not core to their value system necessarily. Many of them may have never even seen a chimpanzee. And our whole approach was centered on them, their values, their motivations, and, use creativity and storytelling in really big ways, to help out there.
So it's kind of like goes directly into our next question is, you often talk about how stories can shift hearts and systems, which you just shared now. And why do you think creative expression is such a powerful force in building a more just and sustainable world? So
in this question, I want to talk about Da Vinci and Gene Roddenberry, who's responsible for the Star Trek universe.
All right.
So when we think about Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest artists of all time. Yes. And we know him for so much of his art, but he was also a scientist and an inventor. And, when you think about all of the inventions that we see in modern technology, so many of them can be traced back to his mind. And, even his scientific drawings, some of his use of the golden ratio, like all of these things trace back to him and thousands of other artists, definitely. But he's who comes to mind with this. And I just think about the idea that if, an artist can imagine it, then we can make it real. And so there's been a bunch of other artists like fiction writers like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. Some of their writing reflects things like the submarine or armored tanks or helicopters. Those didn't exist before their fiction, but they exist now. And though the idea of those machines were put into people's minds because of their fiction. Right. And obviously those are, weapons of war in a lot of ways, exploration too, and, lots of good things. But yes. I bring it to Gene Roddenberry because what a lot of people don't realize is that Gene Roddenberry, in creating the Star Trek universe, what humanity had reached was a society that was free from poverty, that was free from war, and it enabled all people to come together to create the United Federation of Planets and to have this really lofty ideal of being able to go beyond our solar system and start exploring our universe, in big ways. So I connect Da Vinci and Gene Roddenberry in that way, in that, we have these ideas we have so much of our attention is drawn to, I am a Star Wars fan, but that is, that is a darker universe than what Roddenberry created. And so, our pop culture, our art world has these, manifestations of what could be. And there's proof in our history that we can, if an artist, created it in their mind, then we can make it real in this world. And so, that's a big thing that always goes through my mind and what is like my North Star in terms of what I'm working to create.
That's beautiful. And what I hear you say, that art is a powerful tool to change cultural discourse and to direct people and envision a future ahead. And like your partner, David, mentioned before, is that nowadays some people lack imagination. And so we can direct people in many different directions, right? And it's like how we can use art for good, right? And how we can build a future that is sustainable, the future that is, with clean water, clean air, healthy soil for all of us to enjoy and for future generations.
I think there's a lack of imagination, but there is also sort of seeing the unseen too. And to the idea that our attention is so divided today, and in the age of AI, questioning what's real, and that all of that, it's the filling the imagination gap, seeing the unseen, and helping us sort of as imaginative as it can be and as figurative as it can be, it is real. And it's sort of grounding us in important ways.
It's true. And it's interesting, you were talking about AI, and actually today I saw this ad, which was actually pretty good. It was a toothbrush that was made out of aluminum instead of plastic, and the head was made out of some sort of mushrooms that will be compostable afterwards. Brilliant, right? How many brushes we use throughout our life. And so there was this one shot of all these used toothbrushes. And of course, no one is going to go and find toothbrushes all together, but on the shot, AI generated all these toothbrushes that are wasted and all together. And for a visual component, I was like, whoa, yeah, there's so many toothbrushes that are being thrown out every day. And so AI was actually a huge help, I think, in order to, create that storyline, which was really cool.
I mean, a sad fact is that for everyone who's listening to this, every toothbrush they've ever used is, if it's plastic, is still laying in a landfill somewhere. If you imagine that over the course of your life, every single toothbrush.
I can actually pretty much remember.
If you imagine aluminum toothbrush, aluminum is infinitely recyclable. So pretty interesting.
And then to imagine. But then I was looking at it, not to get sidetracked, but I was like, okay, so now I have this Oral-B or whatever, this electronic toothbrush. It works, right? And I'm not going to throw it out so I can get this other one that is more sustainable, right? So it's you kind of stick with what you have. So then I was like, I still want to write it, and I was like, can you make a compostable head for this one? The ones that so many of us have. So there's some sort of hybrid, because it's always a dilemma, right? Do we get rid of what we have to go, but not until maybe it has its own life that is.
I think what you're touching on there is another form of creativity, though, when we think about sustainability in our own lives. I don't love the idea of amplifying consumer behavior as the solution to the problems that we're facing. We know that that a handful of corporations are responsible for the problems that we're facing in the world. But if we all do want to feel like we're a part of the solution, and we do want to drive consumer demand in certain directions, it can be challenging. I mean, I was talking to another guest who's going to be on this show about where she works at Regrocery, and the sort of hoops that David and I go through to figure out what the best product is for us to have in our house. And you just mentioned that, thinking creatively about what's the best solution for me right now, and going and demanding the more earth friendly one, but also not throwing out something that's perfectly useful, until there is an alternative.
Yep, absolutely. And I guess it's same with veganism, right? When you have let's say leather products and you become vegan, it's do we throw out all the leather products that we had and then then move towards majority of the vegan things are plastic, unfortunately. Like if we talk about clothing, yes, there are now so many like leather alternatives that are like made out of mushrooms and other like compostable materials. But yeah, it's been definitely like a big question. And I guess like creativity is one way to solve it. And I want to get back to our questions. When you think about the future we need, what role do you see for artists and creators in helping us get there?
So I think this is similar to the last question, but speaking more practically, I think that especially right now in the political time that we're in, the sort of shift towards authoritarianism around the world, what I see artists doing is continuing to help us see the problems with that shift.
So, hello.
Hello. Number one, the continuing to see the problem with that shift and continuing to inspire and fight against complacency and also continue to remain committed to a different future and recognize that, we don't need to pursue this timeline that we're on, and just like we were just talking about, artists can help us imagine a different timeline and bring us into that space. I also think that there's a real importance now, particularly in the sort of fight against DEI and making things like climate a 4-letter word. It's really important that artists exist in this space that is certainly censored, but isn't as easily censored. And, we can continue to amplify, like even from a traditional marketing and communications perspective, I look to artists now to be amplifying the messages that I know I can't amplify because I could get canceled. I could lose my nonprofit status. Like all these different things, are things that we're facing, right now. And in a weird way, artists aren't facing them in the same way. So certainly they may be, putting their name or their bodily safety on the line, which is something we have to be mindful of, sadly, these days. But it is a need, and one that I see artists stepping up left and right to fill right now.
Yeah, and honestly, like it's what you're touching upon. First of all, like someone told me recently, like you cannot argue with art. Like there is a painting in front of you. Can you argue
exactly.
Not really.
Yeah.
And then like talking about like artists stepping up, and I'm not alone in this. I was talking to some other artists. Like recently, I had to go to Washington D.C. and kind of get myself into maybe like slightly step into politics to, learn more and also to share like environmental issues that we deeply care about. And I was like, why am I here? And I was like, okay, I don't understand, but I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to go with the flow. And seeing that it's really time for all of us to step up, for all of us to take action, forget all these limiting beliefs that like, I cannot do this. Who am I? Am I a philanthropist or not? Like, what is my background? We truly know the truth and what is right within ourselves, and acting from the heart and truly wanting to do good and help. I believe that that's the best life force to drive us towards a meaningful and more beautiful world. And yes.
I was going to say that so much of what's going on right now has us through this weird looking glass. I know I feel like Alice right now of many days. And, and we're talking about art and, just right now, complacency, continuing to build community. And when we're talking about art, like that's such a thing that we can build community around. I mean, we saw it this past weekend, with the mural that we made together. And, so right now, I keep thinking that, and I keep saying that as long as we can continue getting together to make art, getting together, period, then we're winning.
Oof. Beautiful. Yes, when we have that freedom and also opening up space for conversation. And I just want to share what we did this weekend. Actually, Seven, he's here in this room, who's been an engine and invited us to Altadena together with John Hopkins to create this beautiful mural, Prayer for the Earth, where people of Altadena and of other locations around Los Angeles as well came to support and write their prayers and intentions for the community of Altadena and for the planet into the mural that then was sealed in gold, so those prayers can illuminate and radiate into the world. And it was so beautiful. And I think my favorite actually moment was going back the last day. No one was there anymore. And I went to seal the, to put a sealant over the gold. And Teresa, she came and she was there, and she was talking from her heart and her experience to another woman of the experience. And she said there was this one woman, who she like so many times, and like she was grieving so much and she couldn't process the grief, and no matter what was happening in her life, and already 6 months passed, and she's like I wasn't sure how to help her. And then she's like, but yesterday when we were doing the mural, she's like, she was beaming with light. And she's like, it made Teresa so happy, and it made me so happy to hear that there is that art is so healing. And then Teresa gifted her own sketch pad. Okay, first of all, she's like, I'll go get you some art supplies, because she was talking to the other woman. She's like, would you like to start creating again, because it's so healing? And she's like, yeah, but I don't have any art supplies. So Teresa, she went to her car, took her sketchbook, ripped out her drawings, brought it to the woman. She's like, and brought her other pencils, and just like this selfless act of giving. Mm-hmm. And Teresa, she lost 2 houses in the fire.
And her studio.
And all of her art. And yet she's so selflessly giving. And just, I'm going to have tears in my eyes, because it's just so beautiful to witness community come together during these times of hardships and showing up for each other. And I hope that it can inspire others to do that too, and for us also to show up for them. And so this art,
and that effort was, and this is where I feel like I want Seven in the conversation too. But we heard from him a little.
We'll interview him on another podcast.
Yes, 100%. But I think that to this question is a really good example of the role that art can play. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Altadena, Palisades, everyone here has experienced these horrible tragedy of the fires earlier this year, and all of the interconnected systems that caused them to happen, from climate to, local infrastructure and all the complexity that have happened. And, we recognize that the stories were fading, and the need to bring attention, to continue the drumbeat of attention, mm-hmm. On and with this community, and wanting to do the mural project to, at the 6-month mark, continue to bring attention back, and then also, create community. And like you said, we met so many people. Maria Lane is here too, with us tonight too. We're with us, through the whole time. And that was a simple thing that for many of us who are so close to Altadena, but not in Altadena, mm-hmm. It's hard to know how to help. And, that was a good mm-hmm. experience of, bringing people together around a piece of art, creating together. And so a good testament to the power of art in a tough situation.
Yes. And also it invited people to come to Altadena and to drive through and see the destruction, because it's one thing to see it on your screen. Mm-hmm. But when you're there, like for me, like the hardest thing was like to drive and to see posters of like coming soon. This amazing thing is opening and it's going to happen. All these dreams and aspirations that are burned. And seeing that, witnessing that, and I hope that also will be a driving force for people who did come to then support people of Altadena and to remember what happened. Mm-hmm. And you've spoken about a gap in support I'm just getting so vulnerable. I feel like I have to go to the next question because I'm about to cry. You've spoken about a gap in support for creative change makers. And what are you noticing, and what kind of space do you believe we need to build for artists working at the edge of impact and imagination?
So we've already talked about the times we're in, so I won't, call attention to that again, but that's certainly a factor. Mm-hmm. Taking that out of the equation, I see particular for, artists writ large, our systems are not easy to navigate. Certainly a lot of the systems of oppression that have existed for a very long time from, in our case here in the United States, from the founding of the country, persist. And it can feel insurmountable in a lot of ways. And so there's all of that, and then there's the times we're in, and then there's just not knowing how to get started or how to turn your art into a kind of impact. And I'm really grateful for our community that we have for you, Kaleidoscope Foundation, because we have, through Kaleidoscope Foundation, there is this entity that can, create a space even for you, like the illegal nonprofit entity that can exist to support your art. And, many artists don't have something like that. That's a big gap that I see for many artists who are very earnest, who have causes that they, want to be focused on with their art, but lack that kind of infrastructure and, even just to get a grant, like a lot of philanthropists would fund artists, but if you don't have a lot of them require you to have a nonprofit to, funnel the money through. And if you don't have that, then the world has lost that art and the potential impact that it could create. So I think that's a big gap. And, I'm really grateful that, you and our community has Kaleidoscope for that, to fill that gap. So yeah, so that's one big gap. I also, what comes to mind too is just, the sort of, opportunity gap for, people of color, queer artists, and what gets headlines, who gets, there's still the disproportionate prioritization of, certain identities today. And that's certainly another gap that is,
even just being a woman.
Yeah, 100%.
Like not easy to break through. It's
100%.
Yeah.
So, that's the other big one I would call attention to.
Thank you. And I guess like for those who are listening, so fiscal sponsors basically allow donors to, or your supporters to donate to your project, and then they get a tax deduction. And so Kaleidoscope Foundation, Dan Thorman is here in the audience, who is my fiscal sponsor, our fiscal sponsor, and also Creative Visions, also another incredible organizations. Yes, some people know here of them. They're also very supportive of artists, absolutely. And I think it's also important to bring awareness to those organizations so artists know that they're not alone in this. And I personally encourage artists to become impact artists, because there's this other vehicle how you can support your projects that is beyond the commercial strategy. So you can create art, not by the demand of the market, but what your soul truly desires to create. Thank you so much, Shawn, for being here and being for such an incredible instrument and supporting artists, and also helping Laura, who's going to be our next speaker, to be with your strategies, and also seeing, because you worked in the impact world for such a long time, and seeing you actually bring your wisdom and knowledge and understanding of communication and strategy and how to guide, and now you utilize it to also help artists. It's so valuable. And I am so grateful to have you in my life. Thank you so much for everything that you do. And is there any way that we could support you or in your journey and what you do?
Oh gosh, well, definitely my organization, the Jane Goodall Institute. So you can find us at janegoodall.org and at Jane Goodall INST on all the socials. And there's incredible work that Jane Goodall Institute continues. Jane's research celebrated 65 years this year, so it's the longest running study. I guess actually it's the longest running study by a woman ever, which I'm just realizing now as we say this, wildlife study. I have to fact check this, everybody. So we'll fact check this, but
Okay.
but longest running, we know for sure, wild primate study that's ever been done. So we continue that research with Jane. We continue the work that I described that's focused on local communities living around chimpanzee habitat, actually lifting them out of poverty as a form of wildlife conservation, which is really fun and interesting work. And then our youth program, which the bio says I've been employed by the Jane Goodall Institute since 2007, but I actually started as a member of our youth program in 2004. So that's how I got started with Jane, and continue supporting that work now. So there's always a need that's always growing. Roots and Shoots is in 70 countries. So Jane is, ever expanding it, and there's always a need for support and resources there. And then many of us are involved in Los Angeles Climate Week. So we're a big community and a growing community that's sort of redefining the idea of what a climate week is and can be, trying to show the world how green LA can be. So
Through storytelling too.
Yeah, and community engagement. So welcome anyone to join us on that journey.
Yes. Thank you so much, Shawn. Thank you.
Are falling